Hello, this is Paul Brinkhurst from FutureWorks, and this is another ESAT new user interface training video. In this video, we're going to look at assessments. How do you do a staff assessment, and how do you do a self-assessment? We'll also look at the consensus process. So in order to do assessments, the counselor for a learner has to have created the time points. And if we want to, we can just quickly go to manage time points. And I can see that for Betty, we have a self and a staff assessment ready to go. I can also tell this from the dashboard because Betty underscore required says Betty Boop. So I can click on Betty Boop here in the dashboard and it'll start the staff assessment for me. We can also see it in the learner list here, Betty Boop, staff assessment, ready to go. So if I click on staff assessment, it'll start the process. The first page that comes up is asking me about adaptability, gives me the definition. If you want to see the exemplars for adaptability, you can click on skill descriptions. It'll open up the page. Adaptability, and here are all the exemplars listed. So you can remind yourself about them. So what this page tells you, it'll give you all the notes that you have entered on adaptability right here. You'll see them, you can click on them, you can remind yourself what you said. If you're a counselor, you'll see this box, which gives you all the other notes from other people on adaptability, which you probably will have looked at over the previous few weeks as they came in. You also can add a new note here, if you like, and it'll be entered into the note file for Betty Boop on adaptability. In order to actually score then, what you want to do is review your notes. You want to think like an employer and decide what the risk is associated with having Betty Boop as an employee. As soon as you move the cursor, or as soon as you tap on the cursor, it's going to enter your score. And you're scoring between 6 and 1. As you slide it, it tells you a little bit about the behaviors that you're talking about. So the simplest thing, if you're scoring a 1, then what you're saying is the risk of serious problematic behaviors is almost 100%. They're everywhere with everybody, doing every kind of task at all times a day. So this is obviously beyond the scope of a typical employer to manage. As you go up, you enter the yellow zone. So here you might have skills that sometimes they're all right, sometimes they're not. The signs that the person is making progress. But again, it may be problematic for an employer to actually maintain this person. It also is probably risky for you to send this particular learner out on a placement until some of these issues have been resolved. Once you get to 4, you're now just in the green zone. So for FutureWorks, 4 means that the person's behaviors are manageable by an employer and the risk of sending them into a placement is okay. As you go higher, 5 and 6, obviously the consistency of the behaviors is getting better and better. So until you're at a 6, right, they're meeting expectations even in unusual circumstances. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to base your score on your interactions with that learner. If you're in doubt, go on the lower side. There's no point in exaggerating their skills. It doesn't do any good if they then enter the workforce expecting that everything's fine and in fact they're not. So you take your score, you save and continue. And we do the next one. You can see there's the note. If I click on it, I can see the full note. And we just complete however many we need for this. Okay, if you don't move the cursor at all, then the system will take it as a missed entry and it'll put question marks in the score table. You can leave them there, or you'll be able to go back later and do it. So if I left this right now, okay, I can see now Betty Boop in progress. If I re-click on that, I'm doing the last one. I can enter it. Okay, and now Betty Boop's scores are done. We can see those scores if I go to the consensus score table. There's the scores that have been entered, the average score, and because I'm the counselor, I see the consensus score box. I'm the only one who does. So as each person enters their scores, a new row will appear. And when all of the people have scored that you're expecting, you can then have the consensus discussion. That consensus discussion is ideally done with the team because what you're looking for are variances in the scores. So if one person is scoring lower than everybody else, that could either be a bias that needs to be dealt with in that assessor, or it could be that they're experiencing a behavior with that learner that is unique to them or to the type of work they're doing with the learner or to the time of day, whatever it is, you need to explore why that problem is occurring. And then you can work with the learner to try and resolve it. So when you're having your discussion, what you don't want to do is rely on the average. If you rely on the average, then you're missing the point of that low score. If you have one low score or two low scores out of 6, you may decide that the consensus is actually going to have to be closer to that low score in order to emphasize that there is an issue. We can talk about that more when we come to the actual debriefing of plots. But it's really important that you recognize the variability in the scores by your selection of the consensus. Some organizations, you won't have time to gather the team for the consensus, in which case then it's up to the counselor to make that decision based on the notes that the individual scorers have put in, or if necessary, contacting the person and talking to them. So if I want to change one of these scores, I just go ahead and change it, right? This is the score that's actually going to affect the plot. You'll notice here it says Betty Boop needs to complete their self-assessment before I can finalize these scores. So let's have a look at the self-assessment that Betty Boop's going to do. In order to do that, I just need to remind myself of the password for Betty. So I'm going to go to her profile. And I can see the username is Betty Boop and the password is ESAT. So if I log out, and we log in now as Betty, this is now like a learner. I'm a learner logging in, self-assessment questionnaire, start the form, and I've got 36 to do. When they're doing the self-assessment, there are 2 answers that they have to put in for each question. I will bully coworkers if it is needed to get the job done. Rarely at work, not at work. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to get the person to understand that their behaviors aren't always the same, depending on the circumstances they find themselves in. So what they do in a workplace may not be the same as what they do outside a workplace. So what that is telling us is that this exercise is actually an exercise in self-awareness. It's the teaching exercise as well as an assessment. The other thing is the word work is in quotation marks here because they may be in a school program, in which case their work is the school program and they can think about how they're doing in the school program. So work depends on the circumstances. Basically, what I would say is that work is when there are external expectations of behavior imposed on the person. Not at work is when there aren't. It's also important to remember with ESAT that this self-assessment is not intended to be used by itself for important decision-making or high-stakes decisions, right? It is intended to give us a sense of where the person thinks they are in terms of their competencies and make them think about how their behaviors shift in different circumstances. I'm not going to complete all of this during the video, but they would continue on until they've completed the last question and the system says, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to log out. And I'm going to log back in. So once the person has completed their self-assessment, then when you go to learners and we look at Betty Boop, I hope if I clicked on it properly, then what we would see at the consensus score is a box down here that would say finalize. And if you click on the finalize, then the plot will appear and you'll start the process of assessing the plot, analyzing the plot, which we'll talk about in another video. Of course, you also will know when it's time to finalize because you'll see the person's name appear on the finalize required. So that is there when that self-assessment has been completed. Okay. And that really is all you need to know about completing the assessments and the consensus table for an ESAT process.